Hi everyone, and welcome to the Vid-19 conference. My name is Julia Steele, the creator and host, and it gives me my absolute pleasure to welcome you to this fantastic conference and some absolutely fantastic speakers. This session, we have the privilege of hearing from Cameron Schwab. Cameron is a 25-year veteran of the AFL. He was the CEO for Richmond, Melbourne and Fremantle football clubs. And as a new Melburnian, I've been indoctrinated into that beautiful game, Cameron. He's also a brilliant artist, and he's got some great insights. Having sat in a couple of his leadership sessions myself, he has incredible insights from being a CEO at 24, leading some great clubs in arguably what is one of the most high performance sports in the country, Cameron. So absolute privilege. For everyone that's joining, if you could help me out, just pop where you're joining from in the chat box. It'll be great to see who's out there. And Cameron, I'll pass it over to you and ask questions. I'll ask questions as they come through, or we'll leave them to the end.
Yeah, leave them to the end, I think. And but think a lot about your questions. There'll be stuff which will come up which in the course of our conversation will relate to you personally. And I think that's actually almost an overarching message. Whilst the stuff I'm going to talk about is mainly about leadership and the forms of leadership, I'd start with just the fundamental premise that leadership is actually a personal thing. And by that, we have to be prepared to go deep. And even in the conversations that I have in the workshops that I run, the overarching notion is that we have to learn to be able to go deep to go forward. That's just this. It's a core understanding of what we do, and going deep is never easy, particularly at a time when it's very easy to be distracted. And it's interesting, even in the context of the period that we're going through at the moment, is that the people are finding a space for themselves that perhaps wasn't available to them before, and even in doing that is actually working out, how am I going to use that space? What am I going to do with it? And so the conversation we'll have will build on the forms of going deep, and the forms of going deep into your own thinking, but also the forms of going deep into your own person. And like a lot of people, I've got very much a believer in the notion of authentic leadership, and actually had the good opportunity of studying at the Harvard Business School with a guy who was the originator of that thinking, a guy by the name of Bill George. And it took me a long time to work out what authentic leadership actually is as a concept of it. Yes, you want to present something which is people get to know who you are, and in a way which is actually true to who you are. But in the end, I've sort of come around to the core aspect of it, that authenticity requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is a notion that is easily talked about but rarely done in my experience. So I thought I'd just kick it off with what I would consider to be the three reasons for vulnerability, and I go quite deep personally when I have the conversation with people about leadership, because of, as I said, the original notion that leadership is actually a personal thing. But the three notions of vulnerability I want to talk to today is firstly, almost at a strategic level, it's easier that you can actually walk into the room if you are a leader, or if you are someone who is in charge of a room for a time, even if you're a thought leader in your own world. If you can walk into the room as being a truer version of who you are, that is a much easier approach than having to put on your game face. And I'm pleased that I've lived through the era of coaching, which was a game-faced business, where people would almost they'd embrace an aggressive attitude towards leadership, which is something which I really struggled with for a long period of time and didn't realise how much I was actually struggling with it. So it's easier to actually present as a vulnerable leader, because it is the true person, the true version of who you are. The second one is that it actually have to recognise that stuff happens in our lives of which we have no control over. And I shared this with the friends that I've made through thought leaders just recently, including Julia, is that, recently I got diagnosed with cancer and I have surgery next week. And that is something of which I've got no control over. I have a control over how I respond to that, but it is news that was new to me, and it has the potential of being deeply affecting. So if I go through life pretending that that's not happening, again, that's not a true representation of who I am. And the third one, and perhaps the most important one for any leader, is that by being vulnerable, you are actually creating an invitation for people to help you. And so therefore there is a little space which is created, and you'll get to find out a little bit about the room during that time. If you create the space by, that doesn't mean coming in and saying, look, I don't know what I'm doing here, but you come into the room by saying, I am sure that we can create a better outcome by getting the collective capability out on the table here, that we'll come up with a better response than perhaps I could come up with on my own. And so that little invitation that you create, you'll work out who's prepared to step in, and you'll find out a little bit about your team, or you'll find out a little bit about your people at that time. So that's my take on authenticity and the reasons for it. And this is called More to the Game. And I use imagery a lot, and it might be my artist background. And there's some of my art which is actually going to be included in this presentation. And I use imagery, and I also use the metaphor of the imagery. And I know that we've had Gabrielle Dolan talking about storytelling, but my stuff very much builds off storytelling. And the storytelling has to, for me, fulfill sort of, again, three requirements. The first one is I can back it up, as in it comes from the lived experience. It's not someone else's story that I will be telling. It's not something that I've read that I will be telling. It'll emerge very much from my experience, both as a leader. It'll emerge from my experience in part as an artist, and it'll emerge from my experience as a parent, because I think parenting and leadership is a really powerful metaphor. So can you back it up is a really important part of any form of leadership. The second part of it is what I'm saying valuable? Is it important? Is there something to be gained from it? And even in doing that mightn't be specific. Sometimes, and I heard Amy Silver talk about this recently, sometimes what you say may separate the room. It might mean that half the room don't agree with what you've got to say. But again, that's an important insight that you need to have. So if what you're actually putting out there, does it have value, and is it important? And the third one, I reckon, which is probably the most important of the three, and I got caught up in this a lot, is just the simple notion, is it coming from a good place? Because if it's coming from a good place, and I'm talking about one of generosity, of decency, well, you're doing it for the right reasons. It's not about you and your ego. It's not about you and your pride. It's not about you and your anger. It's coming from a good place. So it's called More to the Game, and the reason I've called it More to the Game, and it's a line which emerged from me telling my story, if you like, is that I think the game that we're actually playing, it needs to be a personal game, as in your game needs to be a reflection of who you are. But also the game I come from, which is elite sport, is there's a much deeper understanding than perhaps people think as well. And so I want to delve a little bit deeper into that, particularly as it relates to high performance, and just see where we can actually take it from there. So think through your questions as we're going. I'll move fairly quickly through the core aspects of it, and there'll be a few surprises within it all, which hopefully you'll get something from. So more to the game. Loonig and his humour is up for grabs a little bit at the moment. And one of the things I learned from being an artist is that art is about creating a conversation. In fact, one of my lecturers, I studied art full time a couple of years ago at the Victorian College of the Arts. I went back as a first year uni student in my 50s. And my lecturer there, a wonderful painter by the name of Rath Ishak, came to me at one stage. It was about 3/4 of the way through the first year of fine art. And he said, Cameron, you draw like a CEO, or your art is like a CEO. And which is probably not surprising given that's what I've done for the previous 25 years. But it was almost, in some ways, from an artistic point of view, almost the ultimate put down. He was simply saying to me that you're looking to close out conversations rather than create conversations. And Loonig recently, and people may have read about it, his humour created a conversation which he then said later was different to the one that he was trying to create. And that's the danger in anything that we actually do. If we're putting our stuff out there, you as a leader, you as a thought leader, is that people are going to interpret it in different ways. And again, it may separate the room. But this is the world I come from, which is the faster, higher, stronger world. I lived every day of my life in a elite performance mindset. And it probably came fairly early for me because my father and my cousin, my father was involved in AFL football. My cousin was a 3-time premiership player and coach of Hawthorn. His father umpired a grand final. So the whole thing of high performance was very much part of our existence. And so this faster, higher, stronger mentality pervaded my childhood and into my working life. But it took me a long time to work out that the faster, higher, stronger requires this slower, deeper, wiser. And I love the metaphor of Lunig's cartoon here, because it's very ambiguous. It's very unsure. And in fact, we spend a lot more time living in the other world than we do the world. And in fact, high performance, from my perspective, happens very much in the moment. So we're going to explore the other world at this time. And the other thing about high performance, and you have to always ask yourself one really important question, is how serious are you about it? A lot of people, from what I can see, like the idea of high performance, but really aren't up for what it actually means. And again, I'll talk about that in a moment. So even if you're serious about making the changes that you're required to make, whether that's for you as a leader, you as it relates to your team, you in the context of your own life, and you want to actually set the bar a little bit higher than the one that you're actually currently setting, I reckon the first question is that, how serious are you? And if you can actually look at yourself in a way and say, look, I'm really serious about this, what I would then say is design beats discipline every time. It's not about the idea that I can just maintain my discipline towards staying serious about my performance forever. You have to design a system which backs up everything that you're trying to do. And in that regard, I use the James Clear from Atomic Habits line. We don't rise to the level of our ambition or our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. So I would say, if you're serious about any change of performance at any level, you focus on the system. I get the need for a goal, I get the need for ambition, but it's all about the system you have to create. And in fact, when I actually work with clients now, I put this slide up. This is straight out of my slide deck. So before I'm prepared to enter into any form of agreement with them, I ask them the question, how serious are you about any form of culture program, leadership program that we're actually seeking to do? Because the people who have to be most into it are the people who are in the room now, because it's going to demand things of you that perhaps you haven't thought of in the context of it. You like the idea of high performance, you don't like its reality. And often I'll now actually put a list of the 7 things why my programs fail right from the outset, so that we're actually putting it out on the table, saying if we're about high performance here, we've got to be serious. We have to be serious about it. The people who have to be most serious about it are the people in the room, the people who are leaders. The goal is to do this, is to turn knowledge into wisdom. There's no lack of information. There's no lack of great knowledge about all things performance available. There's no lack of podcasts. There's no lack of books. There's no lack of insight. There's no lack of just pure information. So the gaining of knowledge now is actually a relatively easy thing. What is far more difficult is actually turning that knowledge into wisdom. And so what I mean by that is, are you actually prepared to take some information that you've gained from today, or anything else that you've listened to in recent times from Julie's fantastic work in putting all this together? What do you now have to do to take that piece of knowledge, align it to your current take, and it might even actually change your view, and if it changes your view on something that's been really powerful for you, to now turn that into wisdom. And the line I like to use is, today is not about what you learn, it's about what you're prepared to teach. Not what you learn today, what you're prepared to teach tomorrow. If you're prepared to teach something, it is now part of your wisdom. The knowledge just sits in a book, that sits in a podcast, it might even just sit in your notebook. But once it becomes part of who you are, because you've aligned it to your own lived experience, it's a wisdom which now has a power which is way beyond you. And you never know where that's actually going to end up. So if you're embracing the role as leader, as teacher, it's something I would really encourage you to do, because you are then taking what your learnings are to someone, and they may then take them somewhere else. And the term I use is an unknown meaning for an unknown person. You do not know where this is actually going to end up for you, and there's a real power in that. This is just a page out of my own notebook, and it's something which I've held on to. It says a little bit about my approach in lots of ways. This is my last day as a CEO of an AFL club, and it's got a little date stamp which I had made up, and I just found that I was losing my own history, if you like, with electronic diaries and Googles and Outlooks and all these things. So I still have this little habit, and I do it to this very day, of writing into a form of calendar what my actual meetings were at that time. And I do this for a number of reasons. It's part of a rhythm and a routine whereby I can actually just take a little step back in my day. A role like the one I had was quite overwhelming at different times. And I would say that I was regularly overwhelmed by it. And so this is a little calendar stamp that I had made up, which cost me $20 or whatever. It's also got it's also got the stamp up the top, which is, it says the Melbourne Football Club, MCG, 9th of April 2013, established 1858, secretary. And why that's there? The original secretary of the Melbourne Football Club is a guy by the name of Tom Wills, and he was the originator of the game itself. And he wrote the original rules of Australian football way back in 1858. And so my lineage, whilst I'm now called the CEO, it really is just the secretary. So my lineage goes right back to the origin of the sport, and the sport which has been very defining for me. And so it's a little reminder of my own piece of folklore, but also the importance of legacy as it relates to the role that I was actually playing. You'll also notice if you go a little bit further down the page, I write the word finding something. Finding something is my personal trademark, and we'll talk to that a little bit in a moment. But it's basically saying, what would be the one thing that you would write in your diary every day to remind you of what you're here to do? And so I've written finding something on the page now for 25 years, and you'll notice the words courage, wisdom, imagine, feeling good, staying true underneath it. All part of just this, what I define finding something, and they've changed over the years. That's always evolved. And this day was like any other than the footy club, which I'm the CEO of, is in terrible trouble. We've been thrashed on the weekend, and you'll notice that there's a noon meeting with a fellow named Don McClarty, who was the president of Melbourne, who came into my office and explained to me that I'm no longer the CEO of Melbourne Football Club. And I had a press conference that afternoon. And I knew in many ways it was the end of a career in the game. And there were times where you just sense that life's just going to be different from this point onwards. And this was one of those moments. But I had had the good fortune of working in the game I loved for 30 years. And so there's a real power in that. And I felt almost this sense of privilege which came with that, but it was over. And the one thing I worked out, because I got to do leadership relatively young, and I was, as Julian mentioned, I was a 24-year-old CEO of the Richmond Football Club. And I thought that to be the CEO of an AFL club would be just this wonderful thing to do, something to do. What I quickly worked out that leadership isn't a something to do thing. Leadership has to be a something to be thing. We're not called human doings, we're called human beings. And the be thing is going to be a real theme from this point onwards in the conversation that we're having. That it is, you have to actually recognize that if you are just doing leadership or just doing the work that you're actually doing, you're somehow dishonoring leadership. Being is actually being a fully self-expressed version of you that you can take into any environment that you're creating. And that takes a bit of work. I'm going to talk through the habits that we will evolve, that I would recommend you evolve in order to actually recognize what being a leader actually is. I think it's a really powerful image, and for a whole lot of different reasons. And I've had the good fortune, the guy who took the photo, his name's Michael Wilson, and I've used his imagery, and he's given me access to it in my book I've written called More to the Game. I'll talk about that later as well. This is a photo of the Hawthorn champion, Sam Mitchell, who's just played his 300th game, and he's with his twin girls, his little boy, his wife, and they're walking through the MCG. And there's a couple of things I love about it, the number 5 jumpers and all the kids, which is his number, but it's also a famous Hawthorn number, a guy by the name of Peter Crimmins, who wore it when I was a young fella, who sadly passed away from testicular cancer whilst he was the captain of the club. So it's a folklore number in Hawthorn's history, and he was also a little blonde player as well. I'm taken by the little guy a bit, though. The little guy's got the same haircut, I reckon, as his dad. They go to the same barber. But if you have a look down at his feet, he's also... he's gone to watch his dad play his 300th game in his footy boots. There's something just timeless about that. You've had the dad as the warrior out on the field, just played his 300th game, and there's his little boy next to him, almost in his own version of what his dad just took out onto the MCG. And this is a beautiful image about the folklore of the game. And football and sport has an enormous amount of folklore for it. And from my understanding, one of the main reasons why people were keen to play this weekend, with everything which is going on in the world, is they recognise that people need some joy in their life, and they're struggling with that. And what responsibility does sport have beyond its own requirement, if you like, in the provision of that joy, in the provision of that something for people to look forward to. So this is a wonderful story about that little bit of folklore. But what I'd say about high performance is this: the complexity and contradiction of high performance is the mix of collegiality and accountability. Because what happens not long after this photo is taken, probably in a matter of weeks, and Sam Mitchell's still a very, very good player at this point, he was good enough to come second in Hawthorn's best and fairest, is that his coach, Alistair Clarkson, will come to him and explain to him that he's no longer part of the club. Because Alistair Clarkson's role in all of this, as the coach of the club, is not only to look at performance now, but to look at performance in the future. And when you've got a 33-year-old midfielder in your club, that's not the future. And so Alistair Clarkson's responsibility is, yes, we've loved you as a player. You've played in 4 premierships. You captained one of them, but the club needs now to move beyond you. And so there is an expectation once you come into an elite sporting environment that this is part of the conversation. And what I would say to that is that you cannot have real collegiality in any organisation unless you have accountability for a level of performance. And the hard thing about, where sport's actually relatively easy from that point of view, is it's actually the competition sets the standard. Whereas in business, in our own lives, we have to set our own standards. And real collegiality comes when we collectively set a standard together and we achieve that standard. And so one of the first things any leader has to do is establish a standard of performance. And coming into any organisation, that can actually be tricky, because sometimes the organisation isn't ready for the standards that you actually want to set, and you have to evolve them through that standard. And sport is always emerging in this way. And this is why the wonderful getting together of people who have been a part of the game is when they had collective success. That's the real collegiality. And I think that's the same collegiality in business. And this is, again, an iconic image from Australian football. And this is Nicky Winmar lifting his jumper. Now, it's over 25 years ago this photo was taken. And it's lifting his jumper. And the power of this image was such that it actually changed the conversations parents were having with their kids. I grew up as a player where it was perfectly okay for people to racially prejudice whoever their opponents were. That was just part of it, seen as the gamesmanship of the sport. And it was just when you're almost embarrassed in terms of I am embarrassed by just how dark and almost evil all of that actually was. But before the game, Nicky Winmar is standing in the play race at Victoria Park in Collingwood, and he's talking to his Indigenous teammate, a fellow named Gilbert McAdam, and they're copying all of this abuse through the player race at Victoria Park. And Nicky just turns to his teammate and he says this: "We're not going to put up with this crap." And there's something beautifully succinct in that little statement, because I would say from a leadership perspective, you always have to ask yourself that same question: what crap are you putting up with? If your organisation gossips, for example, that is just crap. That is just bullying in another form. But what I love about this image as well, if Nicky Winmar just says that to Gilbert McAdam, it just stays a private conversation between two mates. But by Nicky Winmar lifting his jumper and the photo captured and then goes all around the country, and there's now a sculpture, a statue of this in Perth, is that Nicky Winmar modelled what he was talking about. He actually became the thing. Leadership is not what you say, it is what you do. People hear your words and they know what you think, they see your actions and they know what you believe. And Nicky Winmar, with this image, we know exactly what he believes. But had he not have done it, it just remains a private conversation. For leadership, it's about lifting the jumper. That's what it is. It's about modelling the behaviours. Yes, you can have all the important conversations you can have, but if you're not prepared to lift the jumper, you're basically dishonouring leadership. And I can't push that harder. And in fact, my times in when I think about my leadership career, I don't think about the decisions I got wrong. I think about the times I either let my ego get out of control, and that had to happen more times than I'm probably prepared to admit. 2, I wasn't brave enough. I wasn't brave enough in the way that Nicky Winmar is brave here. I didn't show enough courage that my role and my responsibility and my job title actually expected of me. And the third one is when I got angry, that I didn't stay calm. And often those three things were happening at the one time, where I was basically happy enough to walk around with the title of CEO, but I wasn't prepared to behave in a way which actually supported that. And again, another powerful image. And the fellow in the background with his hands on his hips is actually Sam Mitchell, who was in the photo a few before. And this is an image of the Hawthorn Football Club, and it's a guy, Isaac Smith, and he's having a kick for goal after the siren. If you look in the background, it shows Hawthorn 82, Geelong 85. If he kicks the goal, Hawthorn go into a preliminary final. It would have been their fifth preliminary final in a row, with the opportunity of playing in their fifth grand final in a row and the possibility of winning their fourth premiership in a row. And that's a great historical significance in the AFL, because the most number of premierships ever won is 4 in a row. And so that's the opportunity, and that's what the responsibility that rests with Isaac Smith at this time. And you can see his opponents in the background, you can see the crowd in the background, and there's probably a few million people watching it at home. His coaches in the coaches box, and not one person has any control over this situation other than Isaac Smith. And a wonderful little saying, which I use with this, is simply, the most important person in a club is the one with the ball in their hand. And as leaders, we're often putting the ball in the hands of other people. And in fact, just by situation and circumstance, the ball finishes in the hand of Isaac Smith at this time. He kicks the goal, their team plays another week, and they are a chance of making reaching an historic milestone in the sport. But unfortunately, he misses the goal. You can see the celebration from his opponents, and you can see, obviously the heartbreak on Isaac Smith's face. And a wonderful little quote from a guy by the name of Neil Danaher, who I talk of a lot. He's a great football person who has raised a lot of money as a man now. He's dying of motor neurone disease, raised over $40 million. He has this saying that the game does not give up its rewards easily, that notion of more to the game. I can't think of anything which is worthwhile in life which comes easily. And so part of the conversation we're going to have is, how do we actually progress in terms of our performance, whether it's based on our team performance, our organisation performance, knowing that real progress is hard won. And Isaac Smith, interestingly, when Hawthorn came to pick their leadership team only 3 months, 4 months after this, in preparation for the following year, Isaac Smith was added to the Hawthorn leadership group. He's very much a part of the future. What happened there was a skill error. There was nothing more. And one of the challenges that we have with as a leader is actually knowing that you're always going to be having to put the ball in someone else's hand. And in fact, I would say that if you're dealing with anything other than sort of 49, 51 decisions as a leader, there's something wrong with your leadership. Basically, you've either become a control freak, as in you're not allowing people to make decisions, as in you're not putting the ball in their hands, or you've got the wrong people. And either way, that's a leadership challenge for you. And so part of it is, where you're at as a leader by your confidence in putting the ball in the hands of other people. And so what does high performance then actually look like? People often talk to me and they say, we want to have a high performance culture. The interesting thing about elite sport is we rarely talk about culture. It's rarely talked about as a thing. We think of culture as an outcome. We think of team as an outcome. The stuff that we're always focused on is high performance behaviours. How do we get the behaviours right? And in fact, in the AFL, we recruit the most selfish human beings known to mankind, being the 18-year-old male, and the number one value in any sporting organisation is selflessness. We can transform selfish young men into selfless athletes. But I struggle to sit in leadership team meetings or board meetings and see the same behaviour. So I see something in 18-year-olds when they come into a high performance environment that I see leaders struggle with in organisations turning over hundreds of millions of dollars. It doesn't seem right to me. So how do we change behaviours? We focus on two things. The first one is the high performance habits. What are the habits? What are the things that we do regularly? If you want to change any form of behaviour, in fact, your behaviours are a product of the things you do often, and they are your habits. So your bad behaviours are probably the product of a bad habit somewhere on the line. Your good behaviours, the product of a good habit. And the other thing which I talked to a little bit is this thing of high performance identity. And it's interesting, when Julia introduced me before, she said, I'm an artist. It took me a long time for me to say that I was an artist. I just said I do art. but I was studying art full time. I think about art all the time. At what point do you slip into that frame of mind where you actually say, I am this? In fact, I've walked into leadership meetings at different times and I've asked the leaders to put their hands up and say, who are the leaders in this room? And no one puts their hand up. Then I say, well, who are the parents in this room? Everyone puts their hand up who have got kids. People sometimes struggle to identify the responsibilities of what it actually means with the identity they need to create for themselves. And those two things are very circular. The habits build on the identity on the habits. But if we're going to have anything as it relates to good, strong behaviours in life to form the culture that we want to create, I focus on the habits and the identity, and that's going to be the focus of the conversation from this point onwards. Okay, the first of the habits is this. So I'll talk to 3 habits today. One is a daily habit, but I'm only talking about just a couple of minutes each day, is to ask yourself a simple question. What's important? Because I can almost guarantee that the most important thing in your life isn't the first email in your inbox. But most people start their day by opening up their Outlook or checking their phone or doing whatever the most noisy thing which comes their way is. So I'm going to suggest that you just take 10 minutes each day in a form which actually works for you. I do it by having a trademark, the personal trademark, which is finding something, but I also do it through journaling. So I just ask myself for 5 minutes or 10 minutes each morning, what's important, and I just start writing down what's important. And it just brings a clarity to the whole thing, because often the what's important thing might be that little action thing that you've been promising to do for the last 6 months, but you haven't got around to doing it. The what's important thing might be the conversation you just need to have that you've just been avoiding for all the reasons that we do. So the first of the habits is just a daily ritual of asking yourself what's important. And I would say that once you become a leader, it becomes something which is much bigger than you. And I love this image. It's a young fella who's got a photographer in front of him, and he lifts his shirt and he shows his FC Barcelona shirt underneath. And I got the opportunity of studying FC Barcelona when I was CEO at Fremantle Footy Club. And I literally went over to Spain with an empty suitcase, hoping to come home with a Barcelona culture with me, like an empty suitcase I wanted to fill with Barcelona mastery. And I got over there and we sat around a table, and they're very good at looking after clubs from other parts of the world. And the first thing that their leader said to us is, you can't take our culture home with you. And their rationale, and it was disappointing because I was thinking, oh, well, this isn't the big opportunity lost. But their rationale is simply, and I remember the next thing he just said was that your culture is in this room. And he was looking at the leaders of our football club. Your culture's here now. And it was a really powerful insight. Because often what we want with people say they want to have a high performance culture, but that somehow they externalize it to themselves. Barca, it was very much part of who they are. And they said, by the way, we play for freedom. We play for freedom. That's who we play for. I'm thinking, well, that's not going to cut it at Fremantle, this playing for freedom stuff. But this young fella, this photo's not taken in Spain. It's taken in a refugee camp in Syria. And this kid's got minimal chance of ever seeing his heroes play. And I reckon if you turned this kid around, he'd have number 10 Lionel Messi on the back. But you can't imagine this kid ever getting the opportunity. And you wouldn't even know where he is now. And you just hope that he's actually still alive in lots of ways. But you can see the pure joy on his face. And I always say to people, I think your kids look most beautiful when they're asleep. But really, when they see this joy, it's something very powerful. And in sport, I had this on a day-by-day basis, not to that same degree as life and death in regard to it all, but something where people uniquely related to what it was that I did. And I always thought it was about this thing which had this history and this heritage and this identity. And it was, that's a big part of it. But I think it's more this, that people want to believe in something which is bigger than themselves. And I think in our workplaces, this has got to be the most fundamental objective. Are we creating something which is bigger than us? Because if we're not, it somehow becomes selfish. And people often say that, how do I make my commercial organisation something bigger? No, it's about the people who are working together, the teams that we create, the friendships that are established, the quality of the work that we do, all of these things will play out in something bigger than them. It doesn't have to have the beautiful story of Barcelona or, the Richmond Footy Club, which I still support and have the good fortune of working for. It is something which is powerful to the group themselves. And we recently saw this with the Australian women winning the T20, and they didn't have a great tournament, but they performed when they had to, and they performed without their best player as well. And it really said something about this group. And this is the moment where they win. And there's just pure joy, and I love that. Almost the same look on the faces as the kid in the previous photo. And what it says to me is this: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And it can be challenging and it can be difficult. The going far thing has some real, difficult elements to it, of which we have to be able to confront. And I'm going to talk to you now about how we do that. This is a wonderful player by the name of Luke Ball, who played for St Kilda, played for Collingwood. But he's walking off the MCG for the last time, and he would have had a conversation with his coach, Nathan Buckley, who's right behind him there, and where Nathan would have explained to Luke that your career is finished. And so even looking at, obviously, the difficulty of facing into life beyond the game for Luke, and he's a terrific fella, but he was a real warrior as well, and I think he played every game as though it was his last. And Alan Jean's a great mentor of mine, used to say that the footballer dies twice. There's an element of him which is lost when they leave the field for the last time. There's Nathan in the background who's looking at Luke saying, well, I had to make this choice. I'd love to celebrate this moment with you, and that's important. But really, Nathan's responsibility is to find the player who's going to replace him in the team, and replace him in the team for the next 8, 9, 10, 15 years. And what it says to me is this, is that people are recruited into an organisation on what they bring to the team, brought in on a certain level of expertise, a certain level of understanding. But people should only survive in organisations on the basis of what they're prepared to do for the team. And a good exercise to do with your teams, with your people in your teams, is this. Ask them the question, what do you think you bring to the team? And they can prepare it in advance. And they'll talk to their capability. And then you ask them the question, what are you prepared to do for the team? As in, what commitment are you prepared to make to us? And the collective value of that then will say something about the culture you've got within your group. And it's also allowing them to be accountable to a behaviour, not just to a capability. And it's a very powerful process. I just suggest you give team members a 20-minute window at your team meetings on a regular basis. And there's no doubt that these conversations would have been had when the Australian cricket team was confronting its situation. And the interesting thing about Australian cricket, for everything that it's actually gone through, is that they in the end just set one clear expectation. And it was this: the objective is to be good at trust. That they basically knew that they had lost trust with each other, but more importantly, they've lost the trust of the Australian public, of which is the reason they exist. So their goal is to become great at trust. And I rarely see that in any form of strategic plan. And I'm sure that there's things that we can all do to ensure that we actually do become good at it. And again, I'm going to talk to some of those things. Because I think as leaders, we're fundamentally in the belief business. And the belief comes at a number of levels. The first one is how we go about creating belief. And that's what the Australian cricketers had to do with each other. How do we actually create belief in each other, that we're actually going to behave in a way which is appropriate to, honour the baggy green or whatever it might have been. How they go about giving a belief, as in they have to give it over to each other. It's not something that they can actually hold to themselves. And often the hardest part for any leaders is how you actually have belief yourself. And I think there's really a cool question that you can actually ask yourself in regard to this. And it's simply, do you believe in your people, and do they believe in you? You then are asking yourself, what is it that you need to see in your people for you to believe in them? And also you ask yourself, what do people need to see in me to truly believe in me? And there's a character capability piece in all of this. Yes, I need to believe that you're a good person, a good human, and that you are going to do the right thing even when it's hard. But I also need to believe in your capability as well. You need to be able to do the job. You need to have the fundamental, what I'd call functional capability to do the job well. So how do we go about that? Remember the first slide I talked about was the something to be slide. If we're looking to create any form of capability, It starts at one point, what I'd call the because phase. So the first of the B's is just because. We're here because. And the because can be judgmental as you like, but we're in this situation because. And our because has actually changed dramatically for all of us in the last few months. We just saw it grow and grow and grow. So our notion of because actually changed. But then anyone's got some form of beyond. They'd like to take themselves someplace different to what they are now, some sort of growth, some sort of place of action. But I don't think we can take people from because to beyond. I think all we've got to do is take them to belief. If we can get people to believe in themselves, we can get people to believe in the organisation, we can get people to believe in you, the leader, we can get people to believe in the plan, believe in the culture, believe in the systems, where we're halfway there. But this belief thing doesn't come easy. There's generally a little bit of going backwards before going forward, a classic sigmoid curve. And this process is called productive struggle. It's that really difficult phase of growth where you think you're getting better, but you maybe not. But once you've actually gone through this process and you've accelerated, and I think all the parents who are listening now would relate to this with their own children, you've actually created now a new point of departure. But that's as far as you can take it. For the rest of it, it's up to them or it's up to you. So all our role here is to actually get them through to the belief phase. And they're not going to find that in their inbox. I've never met anyone who's found their competitive advantage in their inbox. In fact, I like to use the Seth Godin line, busy is the new lazy. People actually, when they talk to you now, they say, yeah, I'm busy. So the next of the habits I'm going to talk to is about how we create a different form of competency than perhaps we've ever thought we'd had to create, which is what we call a reflective competency. And reflecting, the power of reflection now, if you can build this competency into your routine, into your habits, I think it's the most important capability that we're ever going to have. Simply because what has actually led to your success to this point in your life will not be the thing which will take you into the next level. Yes, it will be a point of departure for you, as I explained, but unless you understand what the role requires of you from this point onwards, and I'm talking about even our roles as parents, I think we're all reflecting on that at the moment. What do my kids need of me now? In the context of a world-changing event, which is certainly the most significant of my lifetime. I thought the GFC was big. I thought the recession we had to have was big. All these sorts of circumstances, but nothing like I've seen happening in the world now. So what I'm going to encourage you is you build the capability of reflection. And how do we do that? The first one is what I call the power of three. What I'm going to ask you to do is put every 3 months, set aside 3 hours to answer 3 questions. The first habit I talked about was just the daily asking the question, what's important? But these are now the deeper questions. And you do it in a way which makes sense for you. Put yourself into your most creative space. Find 3 hours, and the good thing is you'll probably find those 3 hours now. Find 3 hours as quickly as you possibly can. Then set aside another 3 hours in 3 months' time and another 3 hours in another 3 months' time. And the 3 questions you're going to ask yourself are simply these. The first one is, what does this role expect of me? And the role is what it expects of you now. If you answered this question 3 months ago, it would be very different to the one that you've actually got now. As we're all sitting here unshaven in our tracky dacks, all that sort of stuff, the role expects something different. How do you lead remotely? That's something you wouldn't have dreamt of having to do. How do you continue to maintain strong client relationships when you can't see them? These are all very difficult challenges. So the role expectations have changed. But at the same time, you have to ask yourself, what do I expect of the role as well? Because the role, you need to have your own expectations of this. And I wasn't great at this question. I reported to boards for most of my working life. It's very hard to establish proper expectations between yourself and a board. So what do I expect of the role? And if there's actually any incongruity between these 2 questions, well, you may have yourself a problem. And I work with a lot of leaders who spend a lifetime climbing a mountain, got to the top and don't like the view. And the final one is a really important one. What do I expect of myself? Because if your role is costing you very important parts of who you are, whether it's your health, whether it's your well-being, whether it's your relationship with your kids, well, there's a big chance you shouldn't be doing it. And I find, again, a lot of people who just aren't prepared to take that step. And there's a wonderful book by Seth Godin called The Dip, where he talks about the lack of capability that people have to make change in their life when they need to. They normally wait for disaster to happen before they make the changes that they need to make. It's really worth reading. And why is this important? Because I don't think it's about the aspiration to be a leader, which is important. I think you need to honour the role, and the aspiration is to make a difference. And that comes back to that idea of believing in something bigger than yourself. So your aspiration is to make a difference. And I love the word honour. The two words that I come back to all the time with leadership are belief and honour, two really powerful words. And we do this by now being a little bit more pragmatic. I'm going to say the third of the habits is now just 30 minutes every month, where you ask yourself 4 questions. So my whole program basically boils down to 8 questions. The first one, what's important? The 3 I just mentioned. And now we're going to get a little bit more strategic. We're going to articulate firstly the ambition. What does winning look like for us? What are we trying to do here? What is the goal? And then we're going to ask ourselves, what do we actually need to be good at? What capability do we actually require here to be actually good at this? And if we don't match ambition with capability, we're over-promising. We don't rise to the level of our ambition, we fall to the level of our capability. And so we have to be realistic in that regard. And then we're going to have to make a choice. What are we going to do? And that question is being asked all around the world at the moment. What, in fact, are we going to do? And even coming out of this little podcast, or this little webinar here, I'd ask you that question. What, in fact, are you going to do? And the last one is, and a really important one, is one of measurement. How will we know? So the first question, what does winning look like? Ambition. What do we need to be good at? Capability. What are we going to do? Is action. And how will we know? Then comes back to measurement. And I'll finish up in just a minute so we can answer a few questions. And the good thing about these 3 questions is they can relate to you, me, as in you as a person, we, the team of which you operate in, and us, the organisation itself. So the same questions can be asked throughout the organisation. In my experience, it's at the we level that it falls down most, that the teams that people operate in generally don't have very clear understanding of what their expectations are and what the goals within it all. And I just finished with a little question for you, and it's a simple one. Who are you actually practicing at being? Are you practicing at just being someone who's good at your inbox? Are you practicing someone who's just good at getting stuff done from A to B? I don't think you're going to find your competitive advantage in that. And one of the things which I often will talk about to people, and is again one of my little drawings, which I did this, the day that I showed you that slide with my notebook on it from day one. This was the day that about a week later, I drew a picture from a photograph from the press conference itself. And the thing that struck me straight away was just how exhausted I actually was. And what I've worked out is that the antidote to exhaustion, in lots of ways, you need to get a little bit more rest. There's no doubt about that. Is the notion of wholeheartedness. How do you actually bring a full version of yourself into the world? And simply, the little line is, when your eyes are tired, the world looks tired also. So hopefully you've got something from that. If you're looking at the world through tired eyes, well, maybe we've just got a little opportunity at the moment just to take a step back and have a little time of reflection. Julie, I'm happy to answer any questions, any thoughts on any of that content.
Absolutely superb, Cameron. Such profound questions at this point in time. I think I've got a couple of questions. I'm just going to give people a second just to reflect, and if anyone wants to show their appreciation in the chat, I think that's absolutely sensational. Your thinking and your experience is next level. It's always great to sit and hear. And I think if there's one most important message we could hear right now, that belief. Like, we've got to believe that we can get through what we're getting through now, and ask ourselves the questions. So the chat actually, in terms of where people are joining from, actually looks like the AFL draw. I think I saw just about every AFL. I saw Adelaide, Brisbane, Perth, Sydney, Melbourne. So people joining from everywhere. So congratulations. One question was, could you repeat the name of the Seth Godin book around dealing with the 3?
Yeah, it's just called The Dip.
Questions?
Yeah, and The Dip. Yeah, so the Dip is it's only a small book too. It's on Audible. It's only a couple of hour read, so it's like a couple of podcasts. But yeah, it's just called The Dip, and basically saying that when we're in the dip, like in the sigmoid curve, that we have a choice at that stage. We either fight through, which is always this never give up mentality, which he's saying is quite flawed, or that might be the right time to give up and do something else. And so there is that element to it as well. I should mention too, because I've got my own book. You see that? More to the Game, which if you go onto my website, it's downloadable. So it's a free, that's the hard copy, but you can download a PDF of it for nothing, which I know so few people have asked about the questions. Well, they all get a run in the book itself if you want to download it, and with an explanation as to how they work. And it's, again, photographs by Michael Wilson and my artwork as part of it as well.
Yeah, it's absolutely stunning book. Having my husband, who's a Geelong fan, picked it up and thought it was an AFL mag, and then went, actually, this is a leadership book. What's going on? Was it? Condom. So lots of generosity, and Amy, I think that answers your question. Andrew Moa has asked, what's one book or author that's influenced you the most?
The most important book I ever read was Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, and I often use that as an example of, I've read the book a number of times over the years, and because as I've got older, the context actually changed, and so I try to read that book every year. In terms of the writing, I love the writing of a guy by the name of David White, and that quote, actually, when the world looks tired, when your eyes are tired, the world looks tired, I should have attributed to him. I think it's a version of what he said. So it's David White, Whyte, and he's just a profound thinker. It's very dense, his work, but you don't have to rush it. You don't feel the need to rush it. And he takes you on a little bit of a journey.
There's also plenty of Go Tigers comments in the chat, but I'll skim over them because I'm a Cats fan. So
yeah, no, I love the Tigers. I've fallen back in love with my footy club. They're easy to love at the moment too. So yeah.
Look, that's all the questions, but the chat is absolutely full of love for you, Cam. So many great insights, and really appreciate you taking some time to share that and your story as well. So please keep safe and well, and if we can support you in the future, please reach out. We're all here for you, and sending love down the camera too.
Thank you very much, Nan, and thanks for the opportunity. And I really congratulate you on this, Julie. This is just a classic responsive opportunity to create amazing content for a whole lot of people who have got an opportunity to learn. You've just fulfilled something which. The only thing I'm shitty on is I never thought of it myself, Julie. That's the only thing. So it's a great piece of work. It really is. Well done.
I've had a few of those messages. A conference company actually reached out to me and said, "Damn you, why didn't we think of that?" And I was They actually asked if I was a conference organizer, and I was like, "No, I'm not."
No, but it took you someone with your project management skills to get it going. So it drew on a very capable part. It drew on your mastery. It drew on your mastery.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again, Cam.
Good on you. Thank you.
Thanks.